Welcome to this afternoon's session on the wellbeing industry. Is it doing us any good? The strand of debates in this room today is on ethics and evidence. So we have already heard this morning about a debate on the overdiagnosis of mental illness and neurodiversity, and if that's something that is really happening. That was discussed this morning. So I think that some of the things that came up this morning may continue with that this afternoon. As it says in the blurb, the wellbeing industry is big business. My name is Rosie Cuckston. I run Birmingham Salon, and we put on discussions like this in Birmingham locally. But in my day job, I work in HR. And I've been working in HR for 20 years, over 20 years actually. And when I started in HR, one of the things that was a kind of hot topic was stress. And doing stress risk assessments for employees. Then it moved to more focusing on employee assistance programs with helplines and websites. And more recently, we now have, we give employees access to apps which are aligned to cognitive behavioural therapy. So all employees are given access to this app, whether or not they've asked for it. But that is a typical trend at the moment in companies and what HR provide for employees. So I think today's debate, we will talk about some more of that in terms of employment. I think there'll also be some focus on health policy and also on the education sector. So I'm going to introduce our speakers now in the order in which they speak. I'm going to give you the short biogs of all of them. They've got longer, more interesting biogs on the website. So first to speak is Amy Gallagher. And Amy is a psychiatric nurse, a psychotherapist, commentator and a founder of Stand Up to Woke. And then secondly, we'll hear from Roy Lilley. Roy is a health policy analyst, and he is the co-author of Wellness, Why Can't We Stop People Getting Sick in the First Place? Third, we'll hear from Rachel Bosenterfer, who is a higher education professional. And I've got a book here which is on sale in the bookstore upstairs, 5 critical essays on wellbeing, and Rachel's essay is in here about cotton wool students, so the wellness industry and the higher education sector. And then fourth to speak is Parah Mullen. Parah is a former operations director from EY Seren and a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. So each speaker's got 7 minutes. So if I ask you, Amy, to kick off, thank you.
Hello everyone. So I think to start off with, it would be worth thinking how we summarise the kind of wellbeing phenomenon. The other panellists might see it differently, but how I would characterise it is that there is a overall kind of emphasis on cultivating positive emotions. So kind of being calm, being relaxed, feeling joyful, being grateful, and a kind of a turning away or a distracting from more negative emotions like anxiety or stress or guilt or shame or those kind of things. And that this is always done kind of via the self. So you will hear lots of terms like self-love, self-care, self-actualization, and so on. I don't necessarily think that this is a bad message. I think there's something good in it. We all do a level of self-care. We should be doing some level of self-care. And certainly in my job as a psychiatric nurse, I've met people whose self-care or self-regard is absolutely at rock bottom, and they really do could do with some, TLC and some wellness and having taken some time out for themselves. I guess my concern with it is that these messages of wellness and well-being and attending to your mental health is that they are being put out on social media or out in the culture at large in a very indiscriminate way. So we often get quite, reasonable ideas kind of diluted down, packaged into a kind of platitude, and they're just sort of pushed out to everyone. Wellness or self-care might be right for somebody who is working a really high-powered job and then goes home and looks after their kids and burning the candle at both ends and never does any, never has any time out for themselves. Maybe for them, setting some time aside to look after themselves and hearing that message from a friend or a therapist would be useful. But for a teenage girl who's maybe socially anxious and she doesn't want to go out and she's got an event she's going to go to, but she's thinking of cancelling it because it's making her stressed, having a message as well, just go and have a bath and listen to some relaxation music, that wouldn't be the right message. The right message for her might be to actually challenge herself and do something that doesn't feel good. And my worry with this is that all these kind of messages that are being put out into the stratosphere, it means that nobody's really benefits and that we all kind of we just all just stop listening to it, and that's kind of my worry. And I think that if we think about the question about the wellbeing industry, I guess that would draw us on to the second point, that this is an industry. Trillions of pounds is spent on wellness. And I think what that means is that we see a shift away from, my line of work in mental health is seeing people who are genuinely in real need, who are patients, and actually seeing people more now as customers. And then you have YouTubers, influencers, therapists that are now geared towards giving the customer what they want. And of course, that would be what the customer wants to hear. So it's kind of a turning away from challenging yourself or for the therapist to challenge the person in need. And it all becomes very kind of nicey. And I don't necessarily get the sense that is helping us long term. So I when I see all this kind of wellness stuff, I think what therapy is actually happening here, and I sometimes think it's good old-fashioned retail therapy. That's what it seems to me to be. It's a rhetorical question, but I guess I'd wonder how many people in this room have bought themselves or bought someone else or have received one of those kind of relaxation candles that are nicely scented, and and how many people, again, I would ask after that, have actually benefited from one of those candles. Has your mental health been really improved? Or if you from a wellness candle. So you have all of this stuff, candles, spa days, face packs, yoga, mindfulness journals, bath salts, lavender oils. I don't, that's fine. I don't think it's nothing terrible about those things, and they can have their uses. But I sometimes think that the joy that a lot of people get from these things is in the buying of them, and the sort of fantasy that if they buy enough of this stuff, it will make them feel happier. And it is, sometimes, big business feeds off of that, and it can be a bit of a lie that this is how the path to happiness. And of course, that would lead on to that this very much becomes a lifestyle that is marketed to the wealthy, and that's another problem I have with it. If you see people and have wellness Instagrams, they're kind of on wellness retreats and they're doing yoga, and it's a lot of money spent on it, and it becomes a kind of a status symbol, actually. So there's kind of wellness, and there's like wellness signalling, or happiness and happiness signalling. So you see all these lovely pictures of people doing their yoga, and I actually don't think it brings about much wellness in them or other people, because it just cultivates feelings of competitiveness and envy and, wanting to have more money and wanting to look happy, and that makes us unhappy. So that's another problem I have with it. And of course, alongside that, there's a tendency for it to become a bit perfectionistic and a bit obsessive. So yes, ideas about getting the right amount of sleep and having a balanced diet and doing exercise, these are all important. But I think within the wellness industry, there's a kind of a ever increasingly niche amount of ways to slightly improve on these things, and it has a kind of diminishing returns to it. A lot of this stuff is kind of obvious. It's not always obvious to everyone, so that's fine, and we need to help those people. But you do see a lot of wealthy, affluent people buying gadgets, buying into all sorts of things to just slightly improve their diet or to make sure their diet is perfectly balanced. And I just don't think that's helpful for them or anyone really. And I guess I'd want to finish on just a sort of final point, was that when I was during my nursing career, I mean, I used to work with a DBT therapist who was very good, and she used to do all the kind of breathing techniques and a dialectical behavioural therapist. It's a bit like CBT. But she used to do, kind of mindfulness and relaxation, and it was benefited a lot of people. And she was quite into wellness and so on. But I kind of noticed was that although she could help people, she seemed to benefit from it more than the people she was helping. And I guess I also found that as a nurse, I would find that when I was helping someone, if I was doing kind of therapy with someone, I could see that certain therapies helped them, but I would come away feeling wonderful because I'd think, gosh, it's so nice to help someone, to see that they are more relaxed, after having spoken to you. And I think what I learned from that, that real happiness and wellness is actually comes when you put yourself to the side and you focus on someone else. It's a wonderful feeling. And I think that or loving, it doesn't have to be through kind of nursing or doing a job, just helping a friend or your partner or something. It's actually when you put yourself to the side that you feel good. And I guess that is what I think is really missing from our current wellbeing mental health phenomenon that we're in, that there's a lot of emphasis on the self, and I don't think that that's where happiness necessarily lies long term. So,
Thank you. Thanks, Amy. So if we'll reserve our applause until we've heard from all our speakers and all the opening comments. Roy, in terms of policy then, is this industry serving policy, or is it a hindrance? Is it a help?
Rosie, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I come at this from the health policy perspective, which is my background. And I wouldn't want you to think that because I've written a book about wellness that I'm part of the industry flogging a book. So much so that if you all get your mobile phones out now, take a picture of that quickly, come on, I've only got 7 minutes, take a picture, there he is at the back, and you can all download a free copy of the book right now, right this afternoon, for free, courtesy of the Health Services Management Association. Okay, you got that? Fine, good? Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. That's the advert out of the way. Now, the book itself started its life in another book. My co-author and I, Ed Smith, who is formerly the chairman of NHS Improvement that was merged into NHS England, we wrote a book called 200 Questions for the NHS, and it was a management book really that challenged management with what we thought were the 200 important and principal questions. We realised very quickly that having written the book, it was a complete waste of time, because until the NHS addresses the fact that 50,000 people join the NHS waiting list a week and less than 50,000 come off the other end, it's really a complete waste of time. We have to figure out what we can do to stop people getting sick in the first place. And we looked at the difference between public health policy, which has sort of disappeared somehow up the back passage of the town hall, and with no budget, and public health professionals really are nowhere near influencing policy in the way they should. The difference between public health and public wellness, and we think there's a difference, and the wellness is to be found at the coincidence of four elements which we discuss in the book. The first is the role of legislation, benign legislation. If you think about public health initiatives that have worked, they've all involved the law. Crash helmets on motorbikes, seatbelts in cars, smoking in the workplace, health and safety legislation. Those are the ones that have had the huge influence on public wellness. That, of course, leads us into the moral and ethical dilemma of the freedom of the individual and the ability to choose. So we discuss that in the book, and we talk about the smoking, the battle that Tony Blair had with smoking, and of course he didn't introduce a smoking ban. This is the interesting thing about that. What he did was he said we will make some places smoke free. And there's a big difference between banning things and making places so free. So it's about the public narrative and how you do that. And we also discuss in the book, in a chip shop, because the book is full of stories, we discuss the difference between a 5-hole salt shaker and a 17-hole salt shaker, which you'll have to read the book to see what the benefits of the two salt shakers are in our diet. We then moved on to public acceptance. It is interesting how some elements of public policy capture the public imagination and they accept them. Like, for example, the plastic bag thing that we have. Now, the plastic bag thing is supposed to raise money for charity. I've never seen really where that money goes. But the cunning supermarkets have introduced things like a bag for life. Now, at my age, I don't buy a bag for life because I don't think I'm going to get a return on investment. But a lot of people do buy bags for life, and people don't realise that actually the supermarkets make a profit out of bags for life. There's a difference between the two. And so we discuss the impact of public acceptance in public policy. We then talk about supportive technology. I mean, you can't write a book about policy these days without talking about technology, but there is a lot of it about which is pretty junk, to be honest, and snake oil. But there are elements of supportive technology that we find in other places. We discuss in the book a family moving house and how they ring up Pickford's. Other removal firms are available, but they ring up Pickford's and say, will you please send over somebody to do a quote for us moving? And they say, we don't do that anymore. They press on their mobile phone on a link. It lights up a kind of FaceTime thing. You walk Pickford's around your house with your phone, show them what you've got, and they send you a quote within 2 hours. Now, that kind of technology can be transferred into social care. One of the big problems we've got at the moment is discharge. The only problem that the NHS really has is its relationship with social care. If we could fix that, it would free up a hell of a lot in the NHS. But all of the problems there are with discharge involves at some stage or other doing some kind of assessment of people's needs when they go home. Getting the home assessment done is a big part of the problem. We could use the Pickford's technology with a neighbour or a relative, and that would make a huge difference, because if you can get people home safely, you stop them getting sick and getting back in the hospital, and that's all part of the wellness regime. And finally, we look at the collaborative leadership model. Henry Mintzberg wrote a book. It's called Beyond Leadership. We reference it in the book. And he talks about communityship, a different type of leadership. At the moment, most leadership in health and social care is based on the heroic model of leadership, and inclusivity is very difficult. Mintzberg describes very well for us, and that's why we pinched all of his work, the Beyond Leadership model, the communityship leadership, which I sort of, those of you who know about the NHS, we've moved now into integrated care boards. And of course, I've been in the NHS for 50 years, and I used to run an integrated care board. In those days, it was called a district health authority, and everybody used to be able to get round the table and talk about things. Yes, I've got the red card here. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I know you've stolen my thoughts, you see.
No,
you've put me off.
You're in flight,
So those are the elements that we look at in the book. We come at it. There's lots of examples in the book how wellness works. Just quickly, there's one example from Japan where employers are obligated to provide annual health checkups for their staff. Guess what? The health service in Japan spends less than we do per head of population, and has better outcomes. So we know that it works. So I come at this very differently from my co-panelists, but we come at it from the practical element of how do we stop people getting sick in the first place. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a really good, because just a quick hands up in the room, when you think about the wellness industry, do you think about something separate to the NHS? Who thinks about something? Yeah. It is interesting. Yeah. Okay.
You better read the book.
So, Rachel, what's the impact of all of this in higher education?
Yes. I'm not a wellness professional. I'm a university professional. I've spent most of my working life in the HE sector. My first job was in 1992, and I'm now on my 6th different institution. So I've got a 30-year longitudinal perspective on universities and students. And over that time, I've observed the growth of what is now the sort of student-specific branch of the wellness industry. If you were in a room with 10 vice-chancellors and you asked them for their 3 top worries, most of them would have student mental health as one of their top 3. And I can assure you that 20 years ago, that was not the case. This is a big, big worry for vice-chancellors, university executives, and the boards of governors, of course. I found it quite difficult to kind of draw a line under this piece because it's such a hot topic, mental health in universities. Every day I was reading or seeing something new that I could talk about. And when I left my workplace on Friday, I walked past the faculty student advice point. It's like a drop-in centre, and there was a big screen saying in capital letters, "Concerned about your mental health?" And I thought, oh, right, okay, right. So I've mentioned that, but just every day I see something new. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that adults regarding the younger generation as worryingly substandard in some way certainly isn't a new phenomenon. The Greek poet Hesiod in the 8th century BC lamented, "I see no hope for the future of our people if we're dependent on the frivolous youth of today, for certainly all youth are reckless beyond words." What seems to me different about contemporary concerns about the young is that we're concerned that they aren't reckless and bold enough, but overly timid and anxious. When I first started working closely with undergraduates at a Russell Group University in the mid-90s, I was preparing them to study abroad in their 3rd year, which is a very anxiety-provoking prospect, actually. They were very much like me and my fellow students from a decade earlier. I'm sure some of them did have crises of confidence and long dark nights of the soul, like we did, but the overwhelming majority of them would have been mortified if anyone, particularly any of the adults, had noticed. They were very keen to be brave and to appear to be brave. Every year I would work with a group of between 250 and 300 students, and in 2000 I noticed a very definite change, not so much in the students, but in the parents. Prior to 2000, I would hear from maybe 1 or 2 mothers or fathers about a student who was going abroad. And in 2000, I heard from between 5 and 10 parents. And those who contacted me were very, very worried about their student children going on a semester or a year abroad. And you will, of course, realise that these students were millennials, the generation who reached maturity at the turn of the millennium. The baby on board generation who was safely confined to car seats and not turned loose in the back of the family car. And my point is that our societal concern about the safety and the psychological safety of young people in general, and students in particular, isn't a trend that came from nowhere in the last few years, and it's been growing for at least a quarter of a century. And of course, there are aspects of being a university student. Who here went to university? Yeah, you know this. It's hard on anyone's mind and spirit, just as being at school is hard on most of us. Most undergraduates are actually still adolescents, with all that entails. Strong and irrational emotions, intense tribal loyalty, and an overwhelming desire to fit in and be accepted by your peers. Some experts in the field are now, at last, saying that in the rush to destigmatise talking about mental health, we've proved that a little learning is a dangerous thing by giving young people on the brink of adulthood, but not there yet, the idea that their perfectly normal adolescent emotions and experiences could be symptomatic of poor mental health. Most students at UK universities are the product of schools which are obliged to concern themselves with Ofsted metrics, including pupil wellbeing. And so these students are not only fluent in the language of mental health, but primed to notice and diagnose symptoms of poor mental health in themselves and their peers. The phenomenon that epitomises the vulnerability of students to their own lack of wellness, at least in the unforgiving eye of the media, is the suicide of a student. The university sector loves league tables, but this is a league table nobody wants to be in. Unfortunately for the University of Bristol, a cluster of 11 student deaths by suicide between 2016 and 2018, created the impression that students are uniquely vulnerable and that university campuses in general, and Bristol in particular, are psychologically dangerous places. Statistics relating to suicide are difficult to interpret, partly because it is, thank goodness, a rare event, and it should be comforting to universities to reflect that the available information suggests that students are actually less likely to take their own lives than their non-student peers. But universities are acutely concerned about their students' mental well-being. A student who takes his or her own life attracts far more attention than the untimely death of a NEET, not in education, employment or training. Is it fair to say that the media are particularly interested if the university is one like Bristol, where the offspring of the professional middle classes and the Chatterati are disproportionately represented? In October 2022, a group of bereaved parents set up a petition on the UK government website calling for the introduction of a legal duty of care for students in higher education. The petition received more than 128,000 signatures and was debated. Universities did the Minister for Health, for HE, didn't support the proposal, but he introduced a package of measures to be put into place by a higher education mental health implementation task force, which has subsequently been outsourced to a group called Student Minds. And I just want to finish up by saying that you would think that the government and universities would have realised by now that outsourcing institutional policy making to lobby groups with an ideological agenda is probably a bad idea. Right, that's me.
Okay, thank you.
So, we want to wait till the end.
Sorry.
That's okay, don't worry. Parah, so, yes.
I'm going to stand. I just feel a bit more comfortable. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm actually going to look at the wellness discussion through the relationship, the changing relationship between bosses and workers, how they've changed over the course of my working life, if you like. I've been working for over 50 years. For the first 2 decades, the norm was still very much workplace and home, 2 different entities. Your employer focused on your workplace and did not particularly care about what you got up to during your non-working life. With respect to wellness, employers did care about you at work. Most of them saw it as their responsibility to provide a safe working environment. If you suffered an injury at work, an occupational therapist may be called upon to deal with it. But what you got up to when you left work, they did not see it as their business. Today, that distinction between workplace and home life has become very blurred. Now, COVID and remote working certainly had a role in this. But the loss of the separation between home and work, I would argue, started a long time ago. The trajectory today is towards employers paying more attention to our lives outside work. I see this as a big problem, as it undermines our personal autonomy, which is very vital to the way we develop as individuals. As Hannah Arendt, a philosopher, explained, we need our private lives because a life spent entirely in public becomes shallow. Employers' intrusion is very much manifested through the work wellness agenda. Now, actually, there are many studies demonstrating the blurring between work and home. These focus mainly on 2 aspects. One, about people bringing work back to the home, hence all the discussion about you not responding to emails, work emails from home. The other one is on the surveillance measures on remote workers. However, I think even more so, the loss of the division between workplace and home life is expressed and reinforced by the preoccupation with wellness. Wellness initiatives mean that, in effect, employers are relating to us as social workers, financial advisors, and counsellors. These interventions are usually carried out by HR, people like me and Rosie, and line management. The activities are endless, and I'm just going to name 3 of them, give you 3 examples. Pernod Ricard, for instance, partners with Unmind, a platform offering one-to-one counselling, talking therapy, meditation, and stress relief resources. South West Railway are providing staff with trauma risk management to cope with traumatic events, including tools to support their mental health and recognize signs of distress in others. Aviva has specialists that offer menopausal support and has launched an internal colleague podcast entitled Me, You and Taboo, discussing eating disorders, pregnancy loss, infertility, so on and so forth. Aviva's Chief People Officer actually put it very nicely. Wellness in work is not about giving you bowls of fruit. It is about practical interventions and nudges. Now, the nudging is not about the work you do, the role you've been employed for. The nudging is about getting you to understand how to be well, often by sharing your feelings, your emotions, your ups and downs with your line manager, with HR, or perhaps your therapist at work. It's about being transparent about your whole self. Furthermore, the wellness agenda reinforces the regressive cultural trend, the undermining of adults taking responsibility for themselves. For example, some employers offer financial advice. Capita, for instance, has given its employees use of an app which is all about teaching you how to save. Sainsbury's wellness champions keep an eye on colleagues to see if anyone looks tired, are they putting on weight, and if so, they intervene and advise you where they can get help. At PwC, employees are encouraged to eat vegan lunches. Eat peas, they say. It actually reminds me of my father, who, when we were kids, used to sit with us with a cane in his hand, making sure we ate our greens. See, in the past, we learnt these life skills and behaviours as part of growing up from our parents, our children, not children, but school, and from our friends. Now, we know that today lots of young people are not socialized in the same way and feel vulnerable as they enter into adulthood. But then what happens at the workplace perpetuates that infantilized culture. Employers assuming responsibility for our wellness deters us from taking control of our lives. Today, when so much in society is viewed via the prism of wellness, in itself actually a very vague and subjective concept, it is not surprising that so many employers have adopted this open-ended way of relating to their staff. So my beef with it all is that by patronizing us, it undermines and weakens our personal autonomy.
Okay, thank you to all our speakers for their comments. So I don't think you mentioned, Parah, but the CIPD is saying that absentee levels are up since the last time they reported. I think before the pandemic they've increased. The wellbeing industry, we've got self-care, we've got apps, we've had policies which, as Roy pointed out, have had some significant positive effects too. But is this doing us any good? We've got a huge waiting list for the NHS. So out to you for your thoughts. And we don't have microphones, so I will just ask you to speak up. I'm going to take a batch of you, most people on this side so far, so that's fine. So what I'll do, just to let you know, speakers, I'll take a batch of questions and we'll come back. You don't have to respond to everything that's raised, whichever thing that you want to address. Okay, so let's see hands again, please. Okay, this gentleman here. Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. There was a study. There was a study done by the International Health Fund and the International Trade Union Movement, indicating that the biggest killer globally is stress. Too many, and it's caused by work. So I think we have to look at our working models and our working patterns to actually really get to the root of the problem.
Thank you. Okay, yes.
I'm going to make a very sexist remark. The wellness industry, predominantly female, has the industry capitalised on the maternal caring vulnerabilities of women? Be kind to others by being kind to yourself.
Thank you. Nice and succinct. Yes, gentleman there.
Yes, I particularly enjoyed Amy's contributions. You seem to be channeling the ghost of Christopher Lash there when you talked about the wellness, sort of what I might call the trauma industrial complex. Fulfilling not only what it seems to me to be making a lot of money, but also, as you rightly say, the fulfilling the emotional needs of the patient, and I use the word patient very liberally. My old dear was a primary school teacher, and she retired before getting pension, specifically because of the reason of this stuff getting pushed on primary age children. I'm wondering what the panel thinks about that in terms of this stuff coming into schools at a very, very young age, equaling English and maths in the timetable, it seems. I have the receipts. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, at the back.
I just want to raise sort of an interesting sort of phenomena which kind of relates to the past sort of sense of workplace solidarity, as we once used to know it as, where that sort of transmuted itself today to the idea of things that people might have heard of, which is like employee resource groups. Have you ever heard of those? It can be all sorts of things. It can be about wellness, it can be for dyslexia, identity politics. And it's a really strange phenomenon. I think it's kind of caught up in this whole kind of wellness debate, that everyone's sort of moting about any sort of identity they have. And it's sort of become this really weird sort of idea of solidarity, but it's not political, it's completely inward and personal. And I just wonder what the panel kind of makes of that and the idea of solidarity. Where's it gone?
Okay, lady at the back there. Yes.
Nobody mentioned trade unions, and I wondered whether this increase in the role of the wellness industry is as a consequence of the decline of trade union collectivism, where people organised themselves together and were strong as a consequence because there's unity and strength. And with the decline of trade unionism, people became very individuated at work. And HR, together with trade unions, changed the focus of their work essentially, and began to give financial advice and the kind of stuff that Parah was talking about to membership. Then obviously as their role declined and they became meaningless to work the workforce, people became very individuated and were therefore more susceptible to the rewards for passivity that was essentially the consequence of trade unions abdicating the scene and people being left to their own devices to struggle on, to be competitive with each other as opposed to being working together to improve things for the better. They became very individuated and consequently more susceptible to this nonsense.
Thank you. Okay, yes.
One aspect that I think draws out a number of contributions is, I guess, the power of the algorithm, because you don't seem to be able to go on LinkedIn or any other social media without becoming very well aware of these special interest advocates and EDI specialists who pretend to they probably do make a living, but pretend to make a contribution by amplifying their lived experience, which is and a trend that I am becoming more and more aware of is that they kind of perpetuate kind of so therefore the algorithm and the kind of the way they use social media kind of proliferates this message to lots of people that kind of we must be sympathetic, we must be kind, we must, and we must kind of accept everybody's differences so therefore I have begun to worry how kind of that pressure, that interest group, like student minds and your EDI groups have actually infiltrated kind of institutions who actually only have a kind of the bounds of HR law and their own in kind of industrial kind of policies around wellness and whether the kindness and the algorithm has kind of misplaced kind of where the conversation needs to go and where what we're emphasising.
Okay, so I mean, I think that relates to something you were saying, Amy, about that sort of, so like a competitiveness with wellness and the sort of influence. I suppose influencers coming up with through the algorithms feeding back into that. Mm-hmm. You could become a kind of, I suppose, hooked on on wellness. YouTubers and struggles, yes. Okay. So I mean, I'm not saying that's what you have to address, but if you want to come back on any of that, there was a point as well directed from the back.
Mm-hmm. I think to the gentleman at the back, and the point about this coming through in schools, I think that to me is, I mean, we've not really covered it, but that to me is particularly worrying. There's this rise of social and emotional learning, which is encouraging children and teenagers to think about their mood or to rate their mood or to find words to describe how they're feeling. A lot of emphasis on naming emotions and so on. Now, in my work as a nurse, I would work with CAMS patients, so children and adolescents who were struggling with mental health problems. They came with a problem, and even then, I'd think very carefully about whether the right intervention was right for them. So, getting someone to do a mood diary or something like that wouldn't necessarily be right for that particular patient. But if you got the sense that it was, you might sort of try it out with them, but you'd try it with them together and you'd make sure they were doing it right. Whereas now in schools, we're just sort of asking everybody what their mood is, and there doesn't seem to be a reason why, and there doesn't seem to be consideration that this might not be the best thing to do. It's a little bit like you said about that sign where it says, "Are you depressed?" And you think, well, I wasn't, but maybe I am now that you've asked me. You sort of, it's like when someone asks you, "Are you itchy?" You think, "Oh, I am a bit now that you've asked me." And I think we as adults, we're experiencing this with the wellness industry, that we're maybe ruminating a bit too much on our mental health. But what is that like for children? And that's to me a real worry. And then I guess I'd come back to the point, to your point about is this feminine? Is this a kind of a women driving this? I think there's something in that, because we have increasing amounts of women in the workplace, and I'm not saying we necessarily shouldn't, but it does feel like this is being driven by. I've worked in, as a nurse, I've worked in mostly sort of female workplaces, and I've had some wonderful experiences working with female leaders and working in a team of female nurses. But I do also see, in terms of what cultures can develop, where what is we would consider ordinary assertiveness can seem in that culture or within that group to be really aggressive, and we need to take time out to think about this incident. You think, no, it was just a small thing. We don't need to think about it. And a lot of HR, I think, is driven by that. But it's almost seen as a good thing to be very sensitive to each other and to talk about things, and I think we can get a bit carried away with that. So I think there is an argument to be made that there's a kind of toxic femininity maybe within this, but it's not all women, and some men are driving this as well. So that's
okay, I think Roy, in terms of the point made about trade unions at the back, you were giving the example of health and safety legislation. That to me is one where trade unions were really quite involved in pushing a lot of the early legislation that came in for that.
Well, it was their raison d'etre right from the start, wasn't it? Going back years. Look, I mean, we try and discuss this in the book, and there is a dichotomy here. We have to make our minds up. There is no doubt about it that it is the law that changes people's behaviour. You can have all the T-shirts you like and all the, eat 5 spuds a day and all that. But at the end of the day, it's the law that changes people's behaviour. And as I said a moment or two ago, seatbelts in cars, crash helmets on motorbikes, smoke-free workplaces, and health and safety in the workplace. And we all laugh about health and safety, have a little dig at it, but it's actually made a huge difference. So we have to decide, I think, what we do about the law and how it imposes in our lives. What do we do? For example, just extending the argument for a moment, if I may, look at obesity. It's the second biggest cause of cancer. It's costing us 6.5 billion a year, and it's going north of 11 billion by 2050. What do we do about that? What law do you pass to stop people from becoming obese? I mean, do you pass a law that no chip shop can have a doorway wider than 15 inches? So, only thin people can buy chips. What sensible law is there? Or do you engage with the difficult bit, the elephant in the room bit? Do you say to the industry, you can make what food you like, we don't care, but we're going to put a big levy on it? Like, actually, amazingly, George Osborne did, Conservative Chancellor, when he introduced the sugar levy. People call it a sugar tax. It's not, it's a sugar levy, although I've never actually seen a playing field that's been built as a result of the sugar levy. There's no question about it that the companies, as big as Coca-Cola, as big as Pepsi, global, full of clout, actually said, you know what, we can reformulate and we'll sell more of our stuff. And they did. So these are the discussions we try to point to in the book. These are the discussions that us as a community have got to think. But I've just finished by saying, if I may, all of these discussions here point to the fact there is something missing in society. There is something missing. What is it? We have to ask ourselves, we have to ask our employers, we have to ask our families, what is missing and how do we replace it?
Okay, good. So, Rachel, then I think there was a comment about this all starting off in primary school with the whole sort of focus on wellness. So your students that you're talking about have started off in that environment. So, I mean, pick up on that, pick up on anything you like. There's quite a lot there to unpack.
Our students, as I said, they arrive absolutely primed with all the vocabulary, and they are expecting, like little lab rats, they're expecting the little press button that says, hit here for wellness, and they're expecting colouring books and sessions with puppies, which has become sort of, not that I've got anything against puppies, I'm not so sure about colouring, but that's become the sort of
pink biro.
I know, that's become the sort of shorthand for wellness in universities. But I think you're absolutely right. The reason students are arriving wanting to press the wellness button is because something's missing, and something's missing when they start at university. And I find it, I'm of an age to find it odd that we almost set up like undergraduate play dates. We set up ways of like getting our undergraduates to mix with each other. Whereas when I went to university, there were things like, they were awful, like, go to sherry parties in your department, and that was hideous. But I guess that was our version of the undergraduate play date that we now see, but minus the puppies. But I think that there were the 2 points that fit together beautifully at the back, and about employee resource groups and then trade unions, and that also shows that something really is missing for all of us, for every age group. As trade unions declined, these really frankly slightly strange employee resource groups grew up in their place. But instead of people having their trade union and fighting for better conditions and so on in common, they have their particular neurodiversity issue in common. Yeah. And I don't think that's as good a thing to have in common as fighting for better working conditions. I think it's something that's grown up to take the place and to provide some sort of community, which is clearly what everybody's absolutely desperate for, I think.
Okay, yeah. Yes, we'll come back to you in a minute. Just let Parah respond to the...
Yeah, just a few points around some of the questions, and I also want to come back to this obesity thing. Somebody asked a question about biggest killer is work. I mean, I think that's what's really interesting when you look at the workplace. Companies are bringing in, one company I know is giving people 6 wellness days. They're falling upon themselves to try and look after their employees. But what they never ever address is work itself, because, they're very happy to get you to think about your feelings and your emotions. But actually, if your work, there's a lot of work on your plate. If your job is insecure, your pay is crap, you are going to feel stressed and you are going to feel anxious. And I find it amazing that they want to fix the worker and change his behavior rather than actually address the thing they should be addressing, which is our working environment, right? This is about workplace. And I think that's a problem. The second thing is about solidarity. I actually think it's very difficult today to create the kind of solidarity that we had a long time ago. When the miners' strike was on, I was working in the NHS, as it happens, because I also trained as a nurse. And we went out and supported the miners. And there was all these, discussions about, would you support them? What do you think? And all those things happen. Today, it's very difficult because what's actually happened at the workplace increasingly over the years is that it's very prescriptive what you as an employer do, right? There's so much regulation, a lot of policies. They dictate what you say, how you behave. And I also gave you that example where employers are trying to get employees, to look at each other and think, is this person not so well? Is this person too big? And then what do they do with that information? They feed it into HR and into the employer directly. That is not your tonic to have solidarity. So if we're talking about solidarity, we'll have to stand up for all this regulation, throw it out the window and start working, start being spontaneous. People have a problem, you sit down and you, as a friend or whatever. Today, that isn't really even encouraged. So I think solidarity would be great, but I think we have to go some way towards creating the conditions for that kind of solidarity. Obesity. My personal opinion, I don't think laws are going to change, and I really don't agree that laws should somehow tell me what to eat, how much sugar to take, what to drink, all that. I think obesity...
It's because you're thin.
You have to look at the problems, the economic divisions in our, you have to look at the social structure, right? There are a lot of people in situations economically really not very good. There's a lot of poverty about as well. And there is that kind of thing that I think the government would do better to really look at the working conditions and the social conditions in our society, rather than thinking somehow giving you a magic pill is going to cure you. And let me tell you, when you stop taking that pill, you go back to square one. So it's not an answer to the problems. They have to take the economic problems and look at them and look at the impact on people, really, whether they live up north or south.
Okay.
I will say.
Let's have some more points. I mean, there is a lot coming back about the workplace as well, and I know you want to come back, but let's take another round, and then you can make that point next time. Okay. So, some hands on this side. So I'm going to go to the guy at the back with the white T-shirt on first, because he put a hand up a while ago.
I've been quite struck by different emphases from the panel. So from Roy, I'm hearing about the law, legislation, statistics, initiatives.
Policy.
Thank you. And I'm sure that obviously has its place, but listening to Amy, I was very struck by your comments about how happiness is important, and how happiness is something that we feel when we are serving others and we get outside of ourselves. And it seems to me that the kind of gap between the two of you is where this wellness industry prospers, because a lot of people feel the NHS does not offer them anything other than mechanistic solutions to immediate health problems, almost like they're some kind of machine to be fixed. And I think people want more than that. They feel that there's something missing, they feel unhappy, and no doubt that leads to other things like obesity and other chronic illnesses. But I think the NHS is selling us short by only focusing on the mechanistic solutions, and I think that the wellness industry is selling us short by, as you described, Amy, by making it into an industry, into a profit-driven industry. And I'm very in tune with your idea that we can be happy by serving, maybe by feeling solidarity with others, and working in that direction. I think that's what we need more of.
Okay, good. So, sorry, yes, I know you've got your hand up. I'm going to come down this side first. So we'll start here.
I'm surprised that the room is moving towards a position where Arthur Scargill was the root of our wellness back in the 80s. Bit of a query there. Picking up on the point raised just now, but also other points. Do you think, as our economy and as our society moves away from producing things that we actually use that are productive? I mean, we used to have Concorde, which went across the Atlantic in 2.5 hours, but now we have the wellness industry. Do you think that what's happening is that people are seeing minor issues, turning them into industries just in order to grift?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, some more hands on this side then, please. Okay, so I'll take the two, there's a row of three right at the back. So if...
Three wise monkeys.
Yeah, so no, I don't mean yes to your comment. The gentleman in the purple shirt, and then if you can work your way along that row, please.
I work as a psychotherapist. I can remember early on having a client who was padding across the room with scabs that were weeping, covered in scabs. That person was really mentally ill. I seem to now hear about or work with people who wake up in the morning and ask the question, how am I? And the response often is, I don't know. And I'm starting to form more and more the opinion that in this hyper-liberal society, without any norms, people are just adrift, which is great for the wellness industry. So I'll just leave you with that observation, other than I disagree with quite a lot about what Roy's been saying.
That's why I'm here.
Okay.
In a sense, to follow on from that, I have worked until very recently as a school counsellor, and there's a dissonance between the focus on emotions, naming your emotions, and actually accepting that emotions involve feeling. So, for example, people know the names of lots of emotions, but then you hear teenagers who are afraid to, I quote, catch feelings. If they actually feel something in their mind and body, they think there's something wrong with them. Likewise, events that are likely to cause you to be upset, like somebody has died or your parents have got divorced or something like that, the feelings that accompany that lead them to believe there is something wrong with them and that they have a mental health issue. And a lot of it, a little as Andrew was sitting next to me, is people coming to you to explain perfectly normal feelings in a perfectly that are perfectly normal for that situation, but they feel there's something wrong with them, and yet everyone is emoting everywhere all the time, and there's a complete dissonance between that. That things happen which are going to affect how you feel, but you can learn to come through that and be resilient in that, rather than immediately going for a wellness experience to make you feel better.
And we've never met before.
Okay. Okay, so sorry, there was somebody, yes.
Yeah. I was just going to pick up on the point around what's missing, and for me it's about connection and community. So, you know, we're living in this modern world, we're all really busy, we're on our phones, and so what do we do if we're feeling depressed? We'll book a retreat or do whatever. And I think, yeah, that real human connection. So I've just come back from a couple of weeks in the Namibian desert. We didn't have phones, I was really worried that, you know, we didn't have toilets, we didn't have anything. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we said, you know what, we've had each other, and that we're so content, and, you know, and I just don't know how we kind of go back almost and get rid of all this toxic stuff. Yeah, I haven't got a solution, but that was an observation.
Okay, so there was some more hands up. Yes, this lady here, yes. Sorry.
So I come at it from an education background too, and I think I agree with everything that's been said about community. I think the problem now is from a really early age, and I guess my question is, how are those of us who are in education able to combat what is so kind of embedded now? So when I first started teaching, I think the schools began by being a bit on the mental health side and saying, oh, they're having a mental health break, I'm going to let them not join in with the activity today, they find it challenging. And parents used to fight back against it. But now I feel like a lot of the parents I work with, I work in lots of schools, I also have my own school, and now parents are kind of assisting their children to avoid anything that is slightly like full of friction. They want ease, and the minute the child expresses any sort of discomfort, there is a need to make things easier and to lessen the load. And I think by doing that, they set them up for failure in future. So as they become adults, they've not developed any kind of resilience, the ability to go to push through and then get a sense of self-worth from going, oh, actually, I managed that, it wasn't that hard. And I just wonder how, as a society, we now work against that, because I feel it's so embedded in schools.
Okay, good. So I'll come back out again. We'll have some more points soon. But Roy, I'm just going to ask you to, you said, and now people are sort of presenting responses to that, you said you think there's something fundamentally broken or wrong in society.
I didn't say that. I said there's something missing.
Missing,
West
okay.
Streeting says the NHS is broken, which is rubbish, but I haven't said that.
It is.
I said there's something missing.
Missing, yeah.
And that's that we should lock the doors and no one should leave until our collective thoughts can figure out what it is that's missing. Because that's the most important thing. I just want to address the gentleman in the white T-shirts thing about the role of the NHS. Look, the NHS is not public health. The NHS is the dust cart that follows the Lord Mayor's show of life. It just scoops up everything and tries to fix people up. It's not the job of the NHS. People think it is, but it isn't. And it's the job of public health. And public health has largely failed because of the way it's been organised and funded. That's why we get into wellness, and that's why I wrote the book. That's a very shorthand answer, and forgive me for being abrupt. But as far as what is missing is concerned, well, what is it? I just made a few notes here. What's missing? Community, family, anchor, alternative focus, discipline, ambition, or love. What is it that's missing? There are 3 pillars to public health. The first is a decent job. The second is a safe place to live. And the third is to be able to live and love with who you want. Those are the 3 fundamentals that we can't do. We can't provide people with decent housing, where people have got rotten jobs on rotten contracts, and it is very difficult to be with some people, to be with who they want to be with. So we don't run society properly. Now, and several people have mentioned, well, it's society's fault, and it is. But what do we do about that? We can't unpick history. We are where we are. So what do we do about making tomorrow better than yesterday? And we can't do that unless we put some things in place. Some of which you won't agree with, some of which maybe you will in the fullness of time, and the gentleman at the back will never agree with you, but that's good. That's why we have these wonderful debates and these wonderful weekends. That's fine. And it's only through the richness of debates that we find the formula for our future. And that's what we should be doing.
Okay. That's...
You're allowed to clap.
Are we allowed to?
Do you want to respond on the obesity point that Parah made as well?
Yes, I do. Listen, I mean, again, we are where we are with obesity, and I'm not judgmental about it. I'm not going to say that poor people have got to be fat, because it's nonsense. There's plenty of rich people that are fat. We've got to deal with people who have a weight issue. A lot of it is what they eat. Now, we can do public health challenges from now until we're blue in the face, and I used to be a counsellor and I've run a hospital. So I've been involved on both sides of the fence on this. Most public health messages don't really work. It's the law that works. Now, if we think that a lot of the stuff that people eat, ready-made meals, that kind of stuff that comes in a packet out of Tesco's, and all the evidence is that it is not dietary very good for you, then we should be doing something about what people eat. Now, again, it brings us back to the moral and ethical dilemma, the extent to which we're prepared to interfere in the people's lives. If we can say to the manufacturers of, I don't know, cottage pie, bung it in the microwave and you've got a meal in 5 minutes, can you please take the saturated fats out of it, and please can you make it healthy, and can you make it like mum made? The answer to that will be yes, we can. But they don't, because they're lazy, and it's easy to make it the way they do. And as I come back to the point I made, it was a conservative, God forgive me for saying it, but it was a conservative Chancellor, George Osborne, that took on the soft drink industry. And it was Tony Blair that took on the tobacco industry. And it needs proper leadership from politicians who have the welfare of the citizens that they represent at heart to take on the food industry. And you say, you've got to stop making crap. You can produce pizzas that don't make people fat. Please do it. If you want to, fine. We're going to put a levy on them when we use the money for something worthwhile. But it's up to you. It worked with the soft drinks industry. It's pretty much worked with the tobacco industry, and we can make it work with food. It's leadership we want.
Okay, so Parah.
Yeah, I mean,
wanted to respond to the.
Well, not so much to that obesity discussion.
Yeah.
I think the question, what's missing in society, is quite an interesting question. We've just heard from the back how parents are quite defensive about the way they bring up their children these days. I know from a session I came from where teachers got up and said that they didn't particularly like their job because they've been spat on by kids, which clearly demonstrates that teachers today don't really have the kind of authority perhaps that my teacher did when I was at school. So, and then you've got an elite or a government, people who rule us who are quite defensive about lots of things, primarily very defensive about us being British, living in a Western world, having civilizational values like courage, bravery, duty, ambition. Everybody veers away from talking about these things. Instead, everything that we do is medicalized, yeah? Something that is very pertinent to women, menopause, is now increasingly being medicalized to the degree that people are saying it could be a disability, you've heard it. But, so when you are living in a society which is a culture of thinking that everything is a problem, exacerbated by all the awareness days that we have every day. I think it was Linda at the back who said in one session that the only 2 months that there are no such thing as awareness days is January and December, I think she said. So is it wonder then that we're all turning towards ourselves, into ourselves, and not reaching out to have the community or the family bondage that we need and all these? So that's what's missing. And in a way, it's up to us to try and it's quite a tricky, challenging question, right? How do you turn this round to have people who are resilient, who have ambition, who aspire? How do they see competitiveness as good? How do they not, well, anyway, I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Right, so do you want to respond to anything in particular that was made
just
there?
a quick one. The worry about parents wanting to remove friction. Apparently the Scandinavians call them curling parents because they're in front sweeping everything out of the way. And as a parent myself, I know lots of parents who I think remove or attempt to remove far too much friction from their children's lives. I mean, I'm a pretty kind of kind parent, but I think, you know, a healthy dose of friction is actually very good for children throughout, you know, as they grow up. Yeah, I also wanted to say I love Concord to the wellness industry, and that is just that is a great title for a session to come, I think. Yeah, and if I can go back to the previous group of questions, I want to agree with you that the wellness industry is, I don't think it's necessarily, there are a lot of women promoting wellness. The gentleman who asked this fascinating question is reading his phone, not looking at me, just like a 16-year-old. Hello. I think, and this is possibly, you know, a really objectionable idea that people will really hate. I think we are living through a period of feminised political and social activity, which actually isn't terribly good for us. We sort of lost, and I mean feminised as in. It doesn't mean it's all women that are doing it. There are men who are behaving in this overly feminised way as well. And we've lost the wait till your father gets home influence with, you know, which promotes discipline and putting up and shutting up and stiff upper lip. And I think that is a great big problem. I don't necessarily think it's to do with women, but I would definitely characteristic as feminised. Okay. So I agree with that.
Amy?
Yeah, just coming back to Joseph's point about the NHS treats us as a machine to be fixed. I think that's definitely the case. I think there's a breakdown in meaningful relationships in the NHS. I mean, I'm in my 30s. I grew up at a time when my parents would talk about their GPs like they kind of knew them. They'd say, oh, she's gone off, she's pregnant again, or he's gone off on holiday or something. Whereas now, I don't even know who my GP is. If I have to have a prescription, I'll call up and I'll get a telephone call and I'll explain the problem and I'll get the prescription, and I don't even know who it is that I've spoken to. And I think that is very concerning. There's and I was also thinking about the point that was raised about that we're, in a way, we're obsessed with emotions and mental health, but then in another way we're neglecting it. So at the very sharp end of mental health, so I used to work on psychiatric wards where you get people coming in having attempted to commit suicide or having had a schizophrenic breakdown. And the first thing you do when they arrive on the ward as a nurse is you create a discharge plan, which is actually a plan to discharge them out of hospital. How do we go about getting them out of hospital? And it's very odd. You sort of think, well, hang on a minute, they've come in for a reason. Why is our first kind of thing that we're trying to do is to try to get rid of them? And there was this kind of culture of just that we just want to get through things as quickly as possible, get the patient out the doors, solve the problem in the kind of the easiest way we can, and not look at the real serious problems, not build a relationship with the patient, but just give them the quick thing that they need. And I think that is a problem in the NHS, and that's why, as you say, the wellness industry is taking so many people's money, because it seems to offer something that's different to that, or the opposite of that you can build a meaningful relationship with a therapist or someone or something that will have the time for you. But often the case, it is a lot of money making. So we have these two extremes, as you say. So I think that's a very good point. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see hands of people who haven't spoken yet. Okay, so lady at the back there. Yes.
Hi. I just wanted to pick up on something Amy said at the very beginning. You said that the wellness industry is about things we used to do ourselves when there was no mental health crisis. Like whenever we felt anxious, we just went down the pub with pals or went and bought ourselves a new lipstick. But then there was no mental health crisis, and I think people need to ask themselves why things got worse.
Yeah.
And has the mental health, has the wellness industry been part of the problem? Because the thing about the wellness industry is really about preventative policies. It's really about these holistic policies that say to us, you're fragile, you need to look out for your mental health all the time. Whereas we used to do that, we never used to think that about ourselves. We used to, when we were anxious, go and sort it out for ourselves. But now we've got this industry, and I think Parah characterised it as, employers now coming into a private space in trying to manage our behaviour so that we don't feel fragile, even though it's at the same time as telling us that we're at risk. So I would like people to think about, well, why have has the wellness industry not made it better? And I think the reason why it hasn't made it better, and if you think about it, mental health, people complain that mental health has gone through the roof. I think the reason why is because the wellness industry is to blame for a lot of this stuff. Absolutely. And one of the things we could do is tell it to get out of our lives. Because ordinary people can deal with their emotions and their anxieties. We don't need people coming in and telling us that they're going to sort us out, they're going to prevent things happening to us and give us safety apps. Because I think that's what is causing this churn in people's mental health.
Okay. Yes.
Do I need a mic?
There isn't a mic, sorry. You
have to shout.
Just speak up,
what?
please.
So much has come up now that I've got so many things I could say. I could start with the fact that when I was a student, I ended up in a psychiatric ward, one of the type of ward you worked in. And the long and the short of it is that over a period of time, I thought, these people don't know what they're doing. And from a certain point, I vowed I would never talk to a counsellor, a therapist, a psychiatrist, and any of you in this room. I would never come to you, any of you, with any problem. And I've done okay, you know. How did I get this miraculous recovery? No one's asked me.
Good man.
How did you do that? No one's interested. And I think there's that. So within the system, there's a lack of, like you said, my experience, I've worked with civil service as well. It's bureaucratic. It felt like you were being pushed through this machine, ticket boxes. You meet one psychiatrist one time, then another one. I think they're all terrible. I think the system's terrible. But individually, they're very nice. I can't say like any particular one was a horrible person. So that's one side of it. The other side of it, what I was thinking was about, before someone actually made the point, I was thinking, someone mentioned Scargill. I thought there was Scargill, but there was Thatcher. There was ideology, and there was groups of followers, so they had belief in their leader, and they believed in something, and whether we thought of it or not. And so I think we had that. We had, what no one's mentioned, and it's so old hat, is that God died so long ago, that everyone's forgotten that God is dead. So it was, but even then, for someone to say that God was, religion was an opium, so it's not like this is a new problem. There's always been these, you had Camus in your, read Camus, he's great. I don't think it's solved your problem, but yeah, I do think there's that existential aspect of it. So, and on leadership. Okay. So I didn't get to
okay.
that.
No, just the last quick point, please.
Yeah, leadership, but not leadership as in you should ban this, ban that, but leadership as in a sense of direction. Yeah, okay. From the bosses.
From the bosses, okay. Right, so we've not got long left, so if you can try and keep your points as focused and succinct as you can. So, yes, gentleman there. Yes. Yes, you. No.
Sorry,
because you've spoken before. Sorry, I'm trying to take people who haven't spoken.
I can tell you what's not missing, and that's people with psychology degrees. I do wonder whether the wellness industry is just an opportunity for them to justify their existence, because if you scroll down social media, between every post, there will be an advert, speak to a therapist. Maybe if you weren't on social media, you wouldn't actually need to.
Okay, so there was a lady over this side. Yes.
I just wanted to make a point about narcissism. Somebody over there talking about Christopher Lash. And
sorry, can you speak up a little bit?
To talk about narcissism, and somebody at the back mentioned Christopher Lash, but it seems to me that the overall atmosphere of anxiety, caused perhaps by technology, perhaps by social media, has regressed us into a rather more primary position of defences, where what we've been talking about are systems of projection, how we use our children as objects in which to put in our own anxieties. And I think it's almost like these what we call very basic defence mechanisms, which have kind of regressed us into an infantile condition. And the question is, why is that? And I think a lot of that is to do with technology and our inability to deal with these new media.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for explaining that point. Just hearing that in terms of wellness within the workplace, it strikes me that there might be an issue with scale, in that, possibly picking up on that point there, that HR, part of the HR industry itself and the whole wellness industry possibly feed off each other. But I'm luckily enough, I'm not in the wellness industry, and I don't work for a big organisation, I work for a small business. And when I hear the experience of people in big, rather impersonal organisations, whether in the private sector or the public sector, and you look at the jobs that people are doing and the amount of autonomy and power and so on, I'm not surprised that people are depressed. You know, these jobs are, people must feel disempowered and so on. So I'm not surprised that this has come in to take place. And then when you look at the HR industry, you know, we've talked a lot about institutions, the NHS, universities, big businesses, who I suspect are most of your clients. Yeah, people have problems sometimes because these big organisations don't really provide fulfilling work for people.
Okay. Yes.
I want to share an anecdote. There was a hospital in Beijing that just opened up a bed of math department, and it was oversubscribed in a day. And I think that the victim here is the kids. They are loaded with problems which are not actually theirs. And I'm so surprised at school, like they're not given lectures on how to say no to social media and compromising on others' problems. So I really hope that the juveniles and young people can put down on the social media and live their life better there.
Okay, sorry. Yes, that's okay.
That's so great. Okay, I'm a psychologist. I'm one of those awful pesky psychologists, but I actually don't think psychology is being done properly anymore. I feel that if you are actually going to work to help somebody be well rather than ill, you have to help them to learn to deal with the life of hard knocks. You have to teach your children to be anti-fragile. You have to bring them up to be resilient and teach them that life is not a party and it's not full of happiness. Life can be a bugger and we all suffer. So that my prescription,
Yes.
Okay, so Sir, you did want to make another point. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Just quickly, yes.
Very briefly, I want to push back at Roy. Because,
it's all right, everybody does.
Because Roy, you speak as if these legislative interventions are not controversial or
I don't. I've said it's a moral and ethical dilemma for us all.
Okay.
Don't tag me with that.
Okay.
I never said that.
You can respond in a minute, Roy.
I get the feeling that you don't think they're as complex or controversial as I do.
Of course I do.
And the idea, for instance, you gave the example of the sugar out of the drinks.
Sugar level.
But you don't mention that the aspartame and the saccharine is actually more dangerous and has actually not helped to make our health any better.
Well, we've got to start somewhere.
My final point is that this load of legislative interventions, it leads to mRNA vaccines rushed through, such as AstraZeneca, and the public and the NHS thinks it's doing us all, it's helping us with our well-being, and the consequences we're just finding out, which I think is awful, and I think that's the danger.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for all your points. Some really good ones, and I think the sense that I've gathered from a lot of those is the void. I really like your point about what fills the void, and it used to be, well, not necessarily filling a void, but there used to be a real sense of a clash between, HR and trade unions, for instance, that definitely kept the burgeoning HR industry on its toes, to say the least. Okay, so if you can make your closing points, you can respond or refocus on whatever it is you wanted to for the topic. But yes, keep it as short as you can. Okay, we've got we've got a little bit more than 5 minutes. Okay.
I just want to kind of make the point. I'm not. I mean, I've worked in mental health, and I have had training and to become a therapist. So I'm not anti-therapy. I'm certainly not anti kind of helping people in that way. I do think there's lots of positives, but I think something that I didn't touch on and people have brought up is social media, and I think how quickly messaging now is coming through to us all. There was something that I liked about working with people in the NHS, particularly in mental health, was that you had time, like you got to be able to get to know someone gradually and they could share things with you over time, and you could think about what was the right time to do something when, and you could really think about that person. As I went in the last 10 years, even in my career, I saw how that became increasingly harder to do with cuts and with services being stripped down. And I think so much of the social media age is that it just pushes everything into some compact thing. And I think that is partly deranging us, and I think that is what the wellness industry is doing to psychology. It's creating kind of anti-psychology that is not helpful at all.
Thank you very much. Roy, can you...
I just quickly wanted to touch on something that was said earlier about discharge planning and mental health. You can't do right for doing wrong in the NHS. There was a report into mental health services that said people were being detained in mental health services without any prospect of discharge, and no one really understanding what their care plan was. So the NHS then reversed it and said, OK, we'll do discharge planning and we'll work back from there. That's why they did it. It's the same with elderly people on the wards now. There are 14,000. That's about 3 hospitals full of old people stuck on wards that we can't get home. And we do discharge planning to try and get social services to work with us to get people home. So that's why it's done. I just want to say this really. I mean, it's been a very interesting discussion, and I'm very grateful to you for what all the rude things you've said about me, because I feel I've earned my free ticket here this afternoon. But it is interesting to talk with people who are like-minded and people who are not like-minded, and that's the important thing. I think if the real thing that's missing is pastoralness, if I can invent a word. Pastoralness. It was pastoralness that we got from when we used to be able to sit and have a chat with our GP. It was pastoralness when we could sit and talk to our gran. It was a pastoralness that we could talk to our mum and our dad and our neighbours. We're missing pastoralness. And I think, if we take away anything from this very valuable discussion this afternoon, it is the question. We take home a question. We don't take home an answer. We take home a question which all of us can answer in our lives and our conduct with other people. And that is, what is missing? Not what is missing in our lives, but what is missing in the lives of the people that you involve yourself with and work with and are neighbours with. I used to be a governor of a school. What do you do when kids come to school hungry and can't concentrate because they've not had a proper breakfast? What do you do? What's missing? Breakfast, so you provide a breakfast. What do you do as an employer? I've employed thousands of people over the years. What do you do when they get themselves into financial trouble because of debt, or they're worried about a divorce, or their wife's off with somebody else? You have to provide that pastoralness as an employer, because unless you've got really satisfied employees, you don't have satisfied customers. And if you don't have satisfied customers, you've got no business. So, you're right, you try and do the right thing, and you're always wrong in somebody's eyes. Take home the message. What is missing and how can I fill it?
Thank you, Roy. Okay.
So that leads really well into what I want to say, because as I've kind of got older, I spend more time kind of looking out for other people, doing stuff for other people. And I think that my experience of having a son who's now at university is that what people that age need is somebody who isn't their mum, but who's a bit like their mum, and who will offer advice that's, maybe a little bit less about removing friction and a little bit more about how would you feel if you just, bit down on this and actually just got it done. And I think that's the sort of pastoralness that's missing, is older people who've got that, really solid, it's horrible, I've been through this too, and I had to bite down on it and get through it, and so do you.
That's worth a round of applause.
Okay, I started with work, so I'll end up with the workplace. I mean, there are benefits at work, which from an individual perspective can be very useful, and people do take them up. But I think we do have to think what the implications are when our employers are our social workers and financial advisors and counsellors. I do think it is really important. And you know, the irony about all this, and most of you who are working will have at work have had reviews, performance reviews, and the buzzwords around all these performance reviews will be like, discussions around good work, around autonomy of over your work. Those are the key words that will be used in those one-to-one reviews. And yet, alongside, you've got a plethora of initiatives and intervention in your lives to undermine that very autonomy that is being talked about from a work point of view. Just doesn't add up. It's just not aligned. You know, you either have your autonomy over work and you develop yourself as an individual through personal autonomy, or you just give it away. Let your employer decide what you should eat, how you feel happy. Let him be there when you suffer with personal problems or whatever. I think it's really important. Turn to your colleagues at work, turn to your family, as that's been said, turn to your friends, but not to your employer. He's there to pay you a particular piece of work and, for him to grow his business, get profits and everything else. Your role at work and at home should be two different entities. That's it.
Okay.
So just building on today's session, if you are back here tomorrow, there's a Letters on Liberty, which is on escaping the straitjacket of mental health. That's in the Abbey Room at 1:45 tomorrow afternoon. But before that, and we have touched on it something somewhat tangentially, is a sense of place, how to create community in a fractured world. And that's on at 11 in the Temple Room tomorrow. Thank you.